Welcome Enemaniacs, it's Halloween. I'm Jeff Bob Buckle, and you've tuned into a new episode of The Last Enema. That over there is The Last Enema's male girl, Nurse D. Nurse D, how's it going?
Doing good, Jeff Bob.
And down here we have Last Enema's B-Movie Poop Shoot. How's it going, Poop Shoot?
Fartzilla, fartzilla, fartzilla.
No, I told you we're never gonna watch that movie ever again.
Aw, that's too bad.
But we do have ourselves a movie tonight. It's the story of the ghost of Flight 401. Nurse, do you believe in ghosts?
I guess. I mean, where else do you go if you die?
Now, Nurse D is there to answer your comments and posts and messages from MySpace, Klube, Vine, Shitblaster, Google Buzz, Bebo, and Yik Yak. Now, only one of those is not real, and it's exactly the one you think it is.
Yik Yak. It's probably Yik Yak.
Now, speaking of ghosts, Nurse D.
Were we really speaking of ghosts? All you did was ask me if I believed in them.
Well, I was getting to the point here.
Sure you were.
Now, you ever watch one of them ghost hunting shows?
All the time. It's my favorite thing to do during October.
Really?
Yeah, why not?
Because they're stupid, that's why. I mean, all these shows have some hot guy who looks like he peaked in high school wearing t-shirts either 2 sizes too big or 2 sizes too small, or walking around with a camera in dark places in the middle of the night. Hell, I could do that.
But do you find any ghosts?
Well, I can find just as many ghosts as they do, which is none. They always roll up with about $20 worth of fake electronic equipment, and that has like those little meters and possibly just gauges that flicker and wobble on cue or whenever they move the thing from side to side. And then they always got to turn all the lights out. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because everything looks spookier in night vision. It makes the shadows look sharper. It gives you just enough vision to think you might see something when there's nothing really there.
And it makes the ghost hunter's eyes look creepy too.
Exactly, it's a bunch of circus shit. Then, why do they always got to be somewhere in the middle of the night? They always get locked down at 3 a.m.
Because that's the witching hour.
Well, that's a bunch of bullshit, too. The first use of the term the witching hour came about the latest 1775 in a poem by Reverend Matthew West called Night, an Ode. But it could have gone back as far back as the mid-1500s when the Catholic Church prohibited activities between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. And that was specifically due to people being scared of witches in Europe. But people can't even agree on the time. There were all sorts of hours related to the witching hour. Now, the next most popular one is between midnight and 1 a.m. In fact, there was a DC comic series called The Witching Hour that always had "It's 12 o'clock, The Witching Hour" on every cover. But in truth, back then, most people didn't stay up much past sundown, which meant that people would be woken from slumber in the middle of the night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m. People would swear they heard voices or saw ghosts or whatever, but honestly, it was mostly due to a few things. People could have had issues with sleep disorders or night terrors. But more accurately, the amount of melatonin in people's bodies would be at its peak. But for those who were suffering from various respiratory issues, they would also be most likely to be stirred by coughing fits or difficulty breathing due to there being less cortisol in the blood. That's why you always feel worse later in the day if you have a cold or the flu.
But what does any of this have to do with our movie this week?
Well, this week we have The Ghost of Flight 401, the sensitive story of a commercial passenger flight that crashes in the Florida Everglades and the parts of the plane that could be salvaged get used on other planes, which causes one of the ghosts to come back and haunt future flights. But let's take a look at those B-Movie Enema totals. We have 101 dead bodies, 0 breast, automatic 1 poop deduction, ghostly Bayrum smell, reusing airplane parts for other planes to save money, thanks capitalism, hysterical stewardess epidemic, gratuitous opening narration and text crawl, gratuitous closing narration and text crawl, gratuitous first responder B-roll, gratuitous funeral prayer, gratuitous agnosticism, wake foo, Italian opera foo, airplane foo, hitting on Kim Basinger foo, New Year's party planning foo, skeptic foo, seance foo, plane rolls, waterlogged bodies roll, Borgnine rolls, B-Movie Enema Academy Awards for Kim Basinger for saying, "I hope you choke on your meatballs." Ernest Borgnine as Flight Engineer Dom Chimoli for saying, "There will never be another crash of an L-1011." Gary Lockwood as Skeptical Airline Company Man Jordan Evenhauer. Tina Chin as the Afterlife Believer convert Val. Screenwriter Robert Malcolm Young. And director Stephen Hilliard Stern for doing things the B-Movie Enema way. 3 poops, Jeff Bob says, check it out. Nurse, do you like going on flights for vacations?
Of course I do. Let me guess. You don't?
No, airplanes, cruise ships, trains, they're all tubes full of disease.
But you can't drive everywhere. Sometimes you have to fly.
If it ain't somewhere I can drive, it ain't worth going to.
Driving for hours on end sounds awful.
Not at all, nurse. I mean, there's nothing wrong with getting in your car and driving to wherever you have to go. It gives you a chance to see this great big country we live in. It's like Easy Rider.
Don't they die at the end of Easy Rider?
That's not the point.
Then what's the point?
The point is to have an adventure and see the world.
And I'm saying that sometimes you can fly over a big part of the world to see cooler things.
Anyway.
You're really missing out is all I'm saying.
And I'm saying you're missing out on all the roadside attraction hillbillies you can meet along the way. Alright, so Flight 401 has crashed into the Florida Everglades. Now, this movie was based on a 1976 book by John G. Fuller. Now, Fuller was a non-fiction writer who liked writing books about the supernatural, aliens, and strange and weird things. He wrote not one, but 2 books about aliens in 1966, with Incident at Exeter, about UFO sightings in Exeter, New Hampshire, as well as The Interrupted Journey, 2 Lost Hours Aboard a Flying Saucer, about the abduction of Barney and Betty Hill in the White Mountains area of New Hampshire. A lot of weird stuff going on up there in New Hampshire.
Maybe aliens just like the tourism there.
I suppose so. Then in 1969, Fuller wrote Aliens in the Skies, which was based on the transcripts of congressional hearings from experts like Carl Sagan and others about the possibility of UFOs. Now, far be it from me to question the guy's job, but why write a book based on transcripts when people could just read the transcripts? Why do I have to go have a middleman to get the story about the UFOs?
Do they even release transcripts like that?
How should I know? I guess they had to if the guy came along and got them and then turned it into his own book.
Maybe people don't want to read what the boring old dudes in Congress said, and Fuller cut to the chase about what exciting stuff the experts had to say.
The point is that Fuller tended to write books about sensational stuff. The crash of Flight 401, which we will talk about in the next segment, happened in December 1972, and his book The Ghost of Flight 401 was released in 1976. Then along came this movie, released in 1978. There are quite a few recognizable names in this movie. The top billed guy is Ernest Borgnine. We all know Ernest Borgnine. You know who Ernest Borgnine is, nurse.
Cabby from Escape from New York.
Exactly. He had a 60-year career. which ended pretty much when he died at the age of 95. He had over 200 credits. I knew him from The Black Hole, the Disney sci-fi flick to cash in on Star Wars. His best known role was as the title character Marty, which earned him the 1955 Academy Award for Best Actor. He's playing Dom Chamoli, the flight engineer on this flight. Playing Captain Loft is Russell Johnson, who is really only ever remembered for being the professor on Gilligan's Island, even though he had a ton of other credits.
Yeah, why doesn't anyone remember him for being Professor Benson in The Great Skycopter Rescue?
Definitely a mystery, if you ask me, nurse. The third member of this crew is the first officer, played by Howard Hesseman. Now, Hesseman was best remembered as Johnny Fever on WKRP in Cincinnati, which earned him 2 Primetime Emmy nominations in 1980 and 1981. Later in the 80s, he had a second somewhat popular sitcom, Head of the Class. He left that show abruptly and unexpectedly over disagreements with his character's development and would be replaced by Billy Connolly. We also have another appearance of Gary Lockwood. Nurse, we saw him in Bad Georgia Road.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. That was the movie called Bad Georgia Road, but was shot entirely in California.
That's the one. Lockwood's career goes back to 1958, but he is probably best remembered for playing Gary Mitchell in the second pilot for Star Trek, and then followed that up a couple of years later as Dr. Poole in Stanley Kubrick's sci-fi masterpiece 2001: A Space Odyssey.
You just had to fit a mention of Star Trek in there, didn't you?
Of course I did. It's how we do things the B-Movie Enema way around here.
Uh-huh.
Making a very early appearance in this movie is Kim Basinger. She was born in Athens, Georgia, and the middle child of her family. Both her parents were showbiz people, and her dad played in jazz bands. Her mother was a water ballet dancer in Esther Williams movies, like those Ziegfeld Follies type movies. By the early 70s, Kim became a sought-after model. She got into TV and TV movies in the mid to late 70s, and into movies by appearing in the non-canonical James Bond film Never Say Never Again. Probably her biggest breakout was playing Vicky Vale in 1989's Batman. 8 years later, she won the Best Supporting Actress Oscar for L.A. Confidential. Now, before we get back to the movie, I do want to talk about the Lockheed L-1011 TriStar plane.
Do we have to? I want to get back to the movie.
I'm getting somewhere, I swear.
Here comes the airplane tangent.
Hush, hush, it'll be fine, trust me. The Lockheed L-1011 was pretty much the height of the state-of-the-art airplane technology in 1972 when it launched after 2 years of delay. It was American Airlines that approached Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas in the 60s to ask for a plane that could seat up to at least 250 people and be used for transcontinental travel. Now, Lockheed was not really in the civilian airplane business for a while at that point, but produced the L-1011. These were huge, as were the DC-10s that McDonnell Douglas produced. But both planes used 3 jet engines. The L-1011 was very tall and wide enough for 3 rows of seats with 2 aisles. The headroom on these planes were comfortably high to allow for people to comfortably move about the cabin on long flights. The planes were also 2-story. Under the main cabin, there was a lounge for the flight attendants and a kitchen used to prepare meals. The L-1011s could seat 400 people, making them very popular for high traffic destinations. Of the 250 L-1011s built between 1972 and 1984, only one is still in use, and that's the Stargazer, which is used for launching Pegasus rockets into orbit. The planes were smooth to fly in and pretty comfortable. Moreover, they were very safe and well built. Now, obviously, something went wrong with Flight 401, and we'll talk about the real story of that in the next segment. So, roll the movie. Now, Kim Basinger's nickname has always been Chelsea. Now, how does that work? Her name was Camilla Ann Basinger. I mean, how do you get the nickname of a whole other name out of that?
Maybe she just liked that name.
Or maybe Chelsea is her split personality.
I think she liked that name.
Or maybe Chelsea was the name of her twin sister that she consumed in the womb. And so, in the aftermath of the crash of Flight 401, people are dealing with their trauma, also starting to smell the ghostly scent of Don Chimoli's Bayroom aftershave, and getting chills in the plane's kitchen area. And soon, Dom appears on the reflective surface of the ovens in the kitchen. Nurse, what would you do if you saw a ghost on an airplane?
Is it a scary ghost?
Well, aren't all ghosts kind of scary?
Not all of them. Some of them are friendly, like Casper.
What if it was the ghost of Ernest Borgnine?
We are often visited by the ghost of Cameron Mitchell, so...
But this is specifically Ernest Borgnine, though.
Well, that's a different story. I'd probably still try to make friends with him. He probably also had to deal with not getting enough peanuts or how much it costs to check a second bag. You know, airplane stuff.
Why would a ghost have to check his bag?
He would have ghost shirts and ghost pants. Duh.
Well, I guess I can't argue with that.
No, you can't.
Alright, so let's talk about what happened on the night of December 29, 1972, with the flight that inspired the book that inspired this movie. While they changed the name of the airline and the crew operating it, in truth, this was Eastern Airlines Flight 401, which was operated as a scheduled flight between JFK Airport in Queens, New York, and Miami International Airport. The flight was scheduled to land a little bit before midnight that night. Now, the flight itself was pretty much as smooth as you could want for a flight, particularly one that would have taken off somewhere cold in the dead of winter. But everything was hunky-dory. The plane took off and flew with little to no issues whatsoever. The flight crew of this particular flight was Captain Bob Loft, who was a veteran pilot with nearly 30,000 flight hours. His first officer was Bert Stockstill, who actually had more flight hours with the L-1011 aircraft. And then there was the second officer, flight engineer Don Repo, who had over 15,000 flight hours as an engineer. And in the cockpit of this fateful night was a fourth guy, an Eastern Airlines technical officer, Angel Donadeo, who was also hitching a ride with this flight. And that happens from time to time to get crew members or other employees to a particular destination when they need to be at, for another flight or whatever. Now, the plane was even pretty much on time that night, but the problem happened just after 11:30 p.m. So Flight 401 was beginning its final approach into Miami, and during the process of landing, there are several things pilots and co-pilots would do. Most everything on this flight went off without a hitch, but there was one thing that didn't go normally. Airplanes, and certainly the L-1011s, have 3 landing gears. There are 2 under the wings and then 1 under where the cockpit is. Now, the gears are triggered by a trio of switches that you flip the switches, the gears come out and out of their compartments. And the chassis of the plane would have like a sensor on it. And when the gears lock in place, there would be a sensor that would get triggered. And in turn, the switches on the control panel of the cockpit would have a light that goes on that says, hey, the landing gear is in the proper position and locked down. You're good to go. The light for the landing gear in the front of the plane would not turn on. This caught the crew off guard. So they flipped the switch off, turned it back on again, and still the light wouldn't come on. So there were 2 ideas to have at this point. Naturally, you can't pull the plane over and get out and check for yourself like you can in a car and check a tire. They thought maybe the light bulb was burned out. So they pulled the light out, tried to put it back in, still didn't illuminate. At one point, they even jammed the light bulb so it couldn't be replaced with a brand new bulb, even if they believed it was truly burnt out. But next, Captain Loft sent engineer Repo into what is called the hellhole, which is a compartment under the cockpit where some more manual type mechanisms are kept. Now, Repo was meant to manually lower the landing gear. Even after attempting that, the light still would not turn on. So now they think they actually have a physical problem with the landing gear itself.
That would be terrifying. How would you land a plane without one of the landing gears?
Not well, nurse. This is where things get interesting. So while dealing with the landing gear issue, air traffic controllers at Miami International told them to back off their landing procedure and go into a holding pattern, which eventually took them out over the Everglades. Now during this process, Loft and Stockstill put the altitude at 2,000 feet and then engaged the autopilot. Now the autopilot doesn't work like it does in the movie Airplane. For one, it's not a balloon. For two, it can't get a blowjob from a stewardess. It works more similarly to a car's cruise control. In the case of an airplane, it holds the yoke, the control wheel in the cockpit, steady once a pilot's hands come off the yoke or they release pressure in their arms from it. Now with cruise control, take your foot off the pedal and it will maintain the speed and correct it if you were to go up a hill or something to maintain that set speed. Autopilot, more officially called CWS or control wheel steering, only maintains as much of the straight path you are on and the altitude as best it can. But it was the CWS and the confusion in the cockpit around the landing gear light issue that would lead to this catastrophe. At some point during this 4 minutes of the issue aboard Flight 401, Captain Loft turned to either Repo or Stockstill in the cockpit and gave an order. Upon doing so, his leg nudged the yoke. The nudge was enough to begin to send the airplane into a descent that was totally assisted by the CWS system. Flight 401 was steadily losing altitude.
Isn't there something that tells the cockpit that you are below a safe altitude?
Yes, but all the conversation around how to deal with the problem caused the alarm sound to go unnoticed by the cockpit crew. With the Everglades being a pretty dark area at 20 minutes till midnight, it makes it hard to look out the window and identify that you're slowly diving toward the ground, or in this case, the swamp. And the swamp itself actually immediately put out the flames from the explosion when the plane hit the ground. While air traffic control knew the plane disappeared from their radar, it was kind of lucky. Now, it just so happened that two locals were in the Everglades hunting frogs. One of the guys saw the flash of light that led him to the crash site, and they began saving as many people as they could, as first responders would later come to do a larger scale rescue.
For once, the Florida man does the good thing.
Never underestimate the Florida man in any possible situation. But in the end, 101 people died in total, including Loft, Stockstill, and Repo, and 2 flight attendants. However, that other company employee, Angelo Donadeo, he survived. Repo did initially survive, but died in the hospital, which was adapted into this movie with Borgnine's character. As time passed, people started seeing the ghostly visions of Repo and Loft on various other Eastern Airlines flights. The stories caught on like wildfire, too. So much so that Eastern had to put out a statement that their flights were not haunted and even threatened employees with termination if they ever talked about seeing ghosts or what other flight attendants or pilots saw. So there are a couple of things that were considered to be the problem that caused the hauntings. Now we're going to play a little both sidesism here. On the side of, if you believe these hauntings were real, we have the scenario of all the planes that reported sightings of either Loft or Repo or both having salvaged parts from Flight 401. It makes sense to me that if you have salvaged parts that have no obvious malfunction or missing bits or undamaged parts to be used in maintenance scenarios for other planes. Sure, it would make sense in decommissioned planes that you would do that, so why not wreckage? They say that is what caused the hauntings. The reports, though, of the hauntings would stop over years, and it was due to a report that Eastern took out all the salvaged parts from their other L-1011s. Now, if you were to take the other side, some people at Eastern claimed that there were no sightings, and it was simply in-jokes with employees. However, bad taste that it might be, or general zeitgeist of it being known that a plane of that kind went down not long ago, and people got people to tell spooky stories. Most skeptics believe this, of course, because they're skeptics. There are even some stories that don't exactly jibe about the use of the salvaged parts. But anyway, we'll see in this movie they have a different resolution to the reported sightings of Ernest Borgnine. So, roll the movie. Say, nurse, would you go down to a place called the Hellhole if there was a potentially catastrophic problem 2,000 feet above the ground?
I don't know. Sounds kind of cool to me. Would you?
No, it's called the Hellhole for a reason. So just like that, the ghost of Ernest Borgnine is seanced away. What did you think, nurse?
It did the trick.
Do the review thing.
I thought this was a good pick to finish off the season. You've got ghosts, and that's good enough to qualify for a Halloween episode, right? Anyway, I wish there was a little bit more action with the plane crash. And I do like that there are a lot of things out there you can watch on YouTube about the real incident or look up articles about. I really like that we saw some of the pre-flight checks that the pilot goes through. Kind of gives you some idea of how big the airplane is and how much goes on with the flight. As passengers, we really only ever see the cabin. Most planes these days are so much smaller than the L-1011s, but even the passenger cabin is just a small part of the whole of the plane, so that sequence was cool to get you thinking about what all goes on when a plane full of people takes off. It's also crazy to me to think about how so quickly after that crash they started using pieces of that plane in other planes. If I found out that there were haunted airplane parts on my plane, Actually, that sounds kinda rad. I want to be on that flight. Let's get creepy. Anyway, this was a good end to a good season. I give The Ghost of Flight 401 4 poops out of 5.
Well, that's not too bad, but can you believe it? We're 5 full seasons into the series.
I know. It's pretty cool. You know what else is cool?
Haunted airplanes?
Yes, but I also have viewer mail for you.
What?
Yes.
Oh, it's not going to make me cry, will it?
It might.
I specifically tell you every time not to give me the letters that will make me emotional.
This one is from Chuck Oliver from San Diego.
Alright. Dear Jeff Bob, I watch B-Movie Enema the series every Saturday night with the plush version of a poop chute under my arm like I'm cuddling a teddy bear. Wait, we have plush poop chutes?
I don't know. I'm sure some people like having a stuffed poop chute while watching the show.
I'm sure that's not getting past the YouTube censors. I just wanted to write that I like the movies you play, and while you do occasionally have some okay takes and insights on the movies you're playing, I'd rather see more of Nurse Disembodied. Will you have more shows with more of her, please? And maybe less of you. Sincerely, Chuck Oliver, San Diego. Well, Chuck, I had to say that you might be onto something, but I also kind of feel like this letter was specifically intended for Nurse Disembodied's eyes, and she passed it to me to probably, figure out a way to get more screen time.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I also have this one that was a comment on one of our past episodes on YouTube. It's from user Powerbottom069.
All it says is eat farts.
Yeah, I thought that one was pretty funny.
Alright, that pretty much wraps up this episode and this season of B-Movie Enema the series. Season 6 will kick off in the spring of next year. Keep your eyes peeled at OtherWorlds TV and on the B-Movie Enema Facebook page to find out more. For Poop Shoot and Nurse Dita Mail Girl, I'm Jeff Bob, wishing you a happy Halloween and a gentle reminder that the enema never dies. Did you ever hear about the pilot who always had work?
No.
He was great at landing a job.
Oh god, that was lame.
How about the one about the stand-up who only told jokes about plane crashes? They all crashed and burned.
I feel like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, let's try this one. A blonde went to a flight school insisting that she wanted to learn how to fly. and all the planes were currently in use, so the owner agreed to instruct her by radio on how to pilot a solo helicopter. He took her out, showed her how to start it, and gave her the basics, and then sent her on her way. After she climbed about 1,000 feet, she radioed in, "I'm doing great, I love it, the view is so beautiful, and I'm starting to get the hang of this." After 2,000 feet, she radioed again, saying how easy it was to fly. But the instructor watched her climb over 3,000 feet and was beginning to worry that she hadn't radioed in. And a few minutes later, he watched in horror as she crashed about a half mile away. And he ran over and pulled her from the wreckage. And when he asked her what happened, she said, "I don't know, everything was fine, but as I got higher, I was starting to get cold. And I can barely remember anything after I turned off the big fan." No?
Okay, I'll give you that one. Happy Halloween, everyone!